Welcome back to HTH 2021 CTF Solve videos. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the second cryptography challenge, and that is come out to play. So in this particular challenge, it's just going to give us a location to connect to. So let's go ahead and do that and see what we get. It's going to give us level 1 type base 64 encoded. Oh, this is pretty easy. So I'm just going to copy that. Let's go over to CyberChef and see what that can cook up for us. Over here, put this in as our input, do from base 64, and it's this. All right. Let's go ahead and go back into here, type it in as a response, level 2. Okay, so it's giving us an array of UTF-8 encoded characters. These are decimal encoding, and I think so. So let's see here, 115. If I go to a hex, an ASCII table, see if we can find one real fast. See, one of my favorites is this one. I like this one. It looks like a smaller version of it. Oh, maybe this is the one I like. All right. So the first one was like 110 or something, right? So that's an N. And then if we went to, it's 115 and then 97. So 115 is an S, 97 is an A. So we can go through this whole process and do this. And if we start to do this, we start to see that we start going up level by level by level by level. And this starts to be kind of a nightmare. It ends up there's 100 levels that you have to solve. So obviously you could totally do this by hand, but it's going to take a lot of time. So this is something that we want to script. We want to kind of work towards. So this is something that I'll show you here. This was my challenge or my solve script. And let's let it run. Go ahead and do this. It starts running through. It parses the receive JSON from a string to a JSON using Python, extracts out the type, and based on the type, and then goes to the encoding, grabs it, undoes that encoding, and then presents it back to the server for the next one. And it continues on and on and on. And then finally, we get to this. I'll work through this challenge here in a second, but let me go ahead and just type this in for completeness sake. And we get the correct flag. All right, so let's see what happens here. You need a way to interact with it. Telnetlib is a good way to do this. I think there are other ways that we would be able to interact with this service, but this just ends up being a pretty simple one. If you don't use Python a lot, or if you don't use some type of scripting language in your job, then I think you're sort of missing out. There's a lot of really cool things, and I think it depends on your environment and sort of what you do. On a day-to-day basis. I think Python is probably one of the most useful scripting languages. Obviously, Bash scripts if you're using Linux a lot. I think Ruby is probably something that the only people I know who use Ruby are people who are using Metasploit modules quite a bit and use Ruby to develop them. Other than that, I just don't see too much of it. There's lots of reasons to go use other things, but I think Python and Python 3 particularly has a lot of really nice things that you can just import and use right away. I use it almost every single day in my job in terms of, looking through file systems and cleaning up things, to finding, bugs in software using APIs from Binary Ninja. All sorts of things come out, and it's beneficial for me to use Python. And I hope that's the case for you. And if not, it's something that I think you should probably look into, right? In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to tell the host, give it the port name. We're going to make our telnet connection, and then we're going to create a connection or a function that says receive prompt. So what this is going to say is, on the telnet connection, I want you to keep reading from the input until you see this response. And when you do, I want you to return that information, or I want you to time out if you haven't seen it in a second. So something happens on the other end and it's not spitting out information. It just doesn't sit there and lock up forever. Then we're going to go ahead and receive the level. This is a function that I wrote that's going to say read until a new line. So if we take a look at what the output looks like, it'll give us level. It'll break with a new line and give us response. And then when we type and enter, it presents a new line and then continues this process. So that new line is an invisible character right here that breaks a new line and tells us to respond. So what we're going to do is we're going to read until that and then do the receive prompt. So we'll read up until that and then read the receive prompt and then return that. If there's an issue, we're going to go ahead and raise an exception that we will just give the final line. That's going to happen once we get to the 100th stage and we send something. There's going to be something coming back without a response prompt. Then we're going to go ahead and have another function that's send line. It's just the telnet connection with write and then the line to write. So the very first level comes in with the receive line, and then we tell it what we received. And then as long as received is true, meaning we're continuously getting new receives, we're going to go through this loop and try to do something with it. All right, so if type is not received, we're going to say that it's the flag. When we come down here, we actually have received level 1 type hex. So all we're saying is there's some string that we got, which is going to end up being this whole thing. The rest of this we just print out ourselves. So if type doesn't exist in there, then I think what we've done is we've gotten the string or something went wrong and we need to print things out. If we do receive something that starts, actually this is the starting thing. If it receives with level, then we're going to go ahead and find the first character with the curly brace, and that's going to be an indication that we're starting at our JSON input. So we're going to go ahead and get the rest of this. This index kind of notation basically says go find the location in that array, that string array, of where that curly brace begins. Start there, and then the colon nothing means go all the way until the end. So it's going to get that received, and then we're going to use JSON loads. Loads is load string. It's going to take our string, load it into JSON, and then put it into received. From there, we're going to say received type, which will pull out hex, and then received encoded, which will pull out this guy, right? And then once we have those two things, I think we just end up doing it again in type. If it's base 64, we do something. If it's UTF, we do something. If it's ROT13, we do something. If it's hex, we do another thing. So it's 4 possible encodings. And the way that we do that is I wrote the problem, but if you start doing this, you'll see that you'll get an unhandled type, and then you just add that. And then you run it again, and it starts solving. And then it hits an unhandled type, and then you add that in, and then keep solving, unhandled type. And you keep doing that process until you get all the way through. In this case, if it's base 64, we use the base 64 module. You can just type up how to unencode base 64 in Python, and this will be what you get. So essentially all we're doing is we're saying go to received, the received payload, get the encoded thing, and then we're going to decode it to UTF-8 to make sure that it's actually in a good encoding for base 64, what it requires. Or actually the output from base 64 needs to be decoded so that we can use it. If it's UTF-8, all we have to do is just cycle through each of the things that we saw. So in this case, this is UTF-8. We're going to cycle through this list or array. And for each one, we're going to say get the character for that. So if I load up Python down here and I do CHR of like 110, it's going to give me the character for that. Same thing if I do CHR of like hex 41, should be a capital A. And then we can get the ordinal of things too. So ord capital A, it'll tell us that it's 65. So 41 is 65. So there's ways of just kind of going back and forth between ASCII and hex. If it's ROT13, there is something called codex which has this. Otherwise, you can just Google and copy and paste a ROT13 thing. But essentially, codex encode has a ROT13 available to it, and it will automatically do the rotation 13 for us. And if it's hex, we just do the unhexify. I think we talked about that in a previous challenge. And if it's something else, then we end up breaking. I think what I originally had was a message in here that would print, and I would raise an exception, so I would know there's something wrong with the challenge. I need to go take a look at what's going on. Then once we have this information on decoded, we send it back. So we do send line. Again, send line is just going to write it to our telnet connection. We have to put a new line, otherwise it's like us typing it in and never actually submitting that return. So we go ahead and return that and then receive the next level and then keep going back up. And we just keep doing this over and over and over again. And the result of that ends up looking like this, where it's receiving stuff, processing it, receiving stuff, processing, and doing over and over and over again. This is just such a good example of why we want to learn something like a scripting language. Sure, you can write this up in C, C++, C# if you wanted to, but it's nothing really matches the speed and the ability to like run and check and go back and forth with something and sort of like I feel like working with a scripting language like Python is sort of like working with clay, where you can, if you mess up, you can just kind of smudge it and like work again or slap some more clay on it. Whereas writing in C is more like chiseling it out of stone. If you mess up, it's a little bit more involved to fix. Maybe a bad way to put it. But this is it. That's how you solve this particular challenge. It did require quite a bit more. So I understand how there are fewer solves with this one, but this is the type of effort that I think we're looking for. I think this is what, these types of challenges will require. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again in the next video.